At a crowded diner off the highway in Georgia, a hard-working black waitress, a single mother just trying to get by, witnesses a mysterious man from the group known as HELLS walk in, only to be shunned by everyone around him. Despite the threats and whispers, she offers him a cup of coffee and a seat. That small act costs her job, but the next day she receives a massive secret deposit. She doesn't know he's a wealthy CEO, and what happens next will change her life forever. Before we dive in this story, let us know where you're watching from. We love to hear your thoughts. High noon. The asphalt outside shimmered like a griddle in the ruthless Georgia sun. Right off the dusty stretch of I-75, a Waffle House blinked in fluorescent defiance, yellow signage buzzing against the heat haze, promising comfort food and cold drinks to passing truckers and tired locals. Inside, the hum of ceiling fans competed with the slow drawl of a country music station, and the scent of sizzling bacon clung to the air like sweat on skin. The place was full. Men in high-visibility vests hunched over breakfast for lunch. A pair of state troopers leaned into their booth, slurping iced tea, boots tapping in rhythm. Most of the crowd shared a common thread. White, middle-aged, Southern-born, and settled into routines thicker than the syrup on their waffles. Then there was Angela McCoy, 43, dark-skinned, hair tied back tight in a bun that had resisted 1,000 morning shifts. Her Waffle House uniform clung slightly at the shoulders, tired fabric on a strong frame that had carried trays, cleaned spills, and endured stares for over a decade. Her eyes were focused but tired, the kind of tired that goes deeper than sleep. Behind that name tag was a woman who had raised a son alone, fought eviction twice, and still managed to clock in 10 minutes early every shift. Angela moved between tables with practiced grace, but not invisibility. The regulars didn't let her forget. "You got the wrong table again, girl," one of them liked to mutter whenever she approached. Others never looked her in the eye, only waved her down with two-finger snaps like she was part of the tableware. Once, someone left a quarter tip in a folded napkin that read, "Should be lucky you have a job." She had learned to tune it out, mostly, but today wasn't mostly. At 12:17 p.m. the front door creaked open, and the temperature in the room seemed to shift. Not the heat, but the tension. Heads turned, forks paused mid-air, a figure stepped inside. Tall, lean, cloaked in a worn black coat that looked too heavy for the weather. His skin was pale beneath the grime, eyes glassy blue and strangely distant. His boots were scuffed, the laces uneven. He looked like a ghost that had taken the wrong exit off the interstate. He didn't say much, just walked up to the counter, voice low and rasping. "Cheapest sandwich you got, and a glass of water, please." Angela was already moving toward him when the whispers started. "Don't look right." "Probably high." "I bet he's carrying something." A sharp voice cut through it all. "He looks sick. What if he's got something? Y'all want that sitting next to your kids?" Angela's hand tensed on the pot of coffee. She glanced toward the manager, who was conveniently nowhere in sight. She looked back at the man. He hadn't sat yet, just stood, unsure if he was allowed to. The table by the window cleared a space, but not kindly. The two men sitting there stood up, grabbed their plates, and moved to another booth. One muttered loud enough for everyone to hear, "Better disinfect that seat when he's gone." Angela said nothing, but her jaw locked and her eyes narrowed just a bit. She poured a fresh cup of coffee and walked it over to the man in the black coat. He looked up, surprised. Before he could speak, she set it down gently and said, "Everybody's somebody, and everybody gets to eat. That's just how it is." The room went silent for a beat. And then the heat started to rise, not from the grill, but from the glares aimed directly at her. The quiet didn't last. Just as Angela turned to refill a coffee at booth 9, the first voice rose, sharp, nasal, entitled. "Y'all really just gonna serve that thing like he's one of us?" A heavy-set man in a John Deere cap leaned back in his seat, arms crossed, chest puffed out like he'd just announced something brave. His buddy across from him, chewing slow on a sausage link, nodded in agreement. "Yeah," he mumbled around a mouthful. "He looks like he's got something." "Skin like that? That ain't just dirt." Another voice from a booth in the back, feminine, older, whispered just loud enough, You know they bring diseases, right? The ones who live outside? Don't get their shots or nothing. Angela didn't break stride. She carried a tray of scrambled eggs and hash browns to an older couple near the window. Her hands were steady, but her stomach clenched like a fist. She'd been here before. Not just this building, but this moment. It always started like this, someone concerned, someone just asking, then the escalation. The crowd took their cues from one another, growing louder with each passing second, their fear cloaked in civility, their disgust disguised as caution. From behind the counter, Angela could see the man. Hell, she thought his name might be. He'd whispered it earlier, barely above a breath, sitting very still, one hand around the coffee mug, the other in his lap. He hadn't touched the sandwich yet. His shoulders were tense, but his face was calm, not blank. There was thought behind those eyes, but quiet. Too quiet for a room like this. The manager finally emerged from the back, a wiry man barely out of his 20s, wearing a shirt one size too large and an expression that screamed avoidance. He didn't address Hell directly. He walked to Angela and murmured, "You didn't get approval for that. You know we can't be seen. You know, letting in people like that when other customers are complaining." Angela didn't respond right away. She just looked at him. Not with anger. Not yet. Just that tired, knowing stare, like a teacher watching a student repeat the same mistake again and again. He shifted uncomfortably. "Look, I get it, okay? But it's policy. If someone makes the other guests uncomfortable, we have to ask them to leave. That's not personal. That's just business." Angela's voice was low and firm. "He asked for food. He paid. He's not bothering anybody." The manager's eyes flicked nervously to the booths. "Do you think that matters to them? They're already talking about going online. Yelp reviews, complaints. You want me to lose half this shift's crowd over one guy who smells like engine oil and looks like he walked out of a grave?" And there it was. The thing no one had said yet finally pushed into the light. Angela felt the words like cold metal in her chest. Her instinct was to fire back, but she didn't, not yet. She turned back toward the counter and watched Hell take a small bite of his sandwich, careful, slow, like he was trying not to offend the bread. He chewed with intention, swallowed hard. He wasn't hungry. He was starving. Angela's breath caught for a second. A flash of memory, her son, 12 years old, hiding a half-eaten school lunch in his backpack because he was too embarrassed to admit they didn't have dinner at home that night. She remembered getting home late from the diner and finding the sandwich, warm and crushed. She'd cried over that sandwich more than she'd cried over any man. Something clicked in her. Not rage. Something heavier, something solid. She turned back to the manager. "Then let 'em leave," she said, eyes unblinking. "Let them go post whatever they want. That man's hungry, and I'm not throwing out a man who's hungry." The room had gone quieter again, not from respect, but from waiting. Waiting for her to be put back in her place. "You don't make that call," the manager snapped, voice louder now. "You think you're some kind of moral hero? This isn't about you. You're not paid to think. You serve, you smile, you keep the peace. If that's too hard for you, Angela, then maybe this isn't the job for you." Angela felt it then. That sharp, burning twist of fury just beneath her ribs. She looked around. The stares weren't just on Hell anymore. They were on her, her skin, her voice, her decision to treat someone like a human being. It wasn't the first time she'd been made to feel too visible, too loud, too black. She thought of the man at table 4 last week who'd asked her if her hair did that on purpose, of the mother who pulled her child away when Angela smiled and said hello, of the tip left in Confederate currency as a joke, and of all the times she'd swallowed it, smiled, nodded, kept the job, kept the peace. But not this time. She stepped forward just slightly and said, not loudly but with finality, "If serving food to someone in need is the reason I lose this job, then I guess I was never safe in it to begin with." The manager's jaw worked for a second, but no words came. Finally he turned away. "Clock out, Angela," he muttered. "We'll mail your check." She stood still for a beat. Then she reached behind the counter, untied her apron and folded it carefully, like something sacred. She placed it gently beside the register and looked at Hell one last time. He looked up, eyes soft and strange. "You didn't have to," he said quietly. "I didn't expect anyone to." Angela offered a half-smile, though her chest ached. "Nobody expects kindness anymore. That no mean we stop giving it." And then she walked out, shoulders squared, the door swinging behind her with a sharp final clang. The heat outside didn't feel quite so hot anymore, but inside a chill had settled in the room. The kind that made everyone else wonder what exactly they had just witnessed, and why they felt so small in its shadow. The door swung shut behind her, but the heat she left in her wake didn't dissipate. Inside the Waffle House, the silence was louder than the clatter of silverware or the low hum of fluorescent lights. No one spoke at first. The manager stood stiff behind the counter, still facing away, like if he ignored the moment long enough it would erase itself. Hell Engel, still seated at the far end of the counter, took another slow sip of the coffee Angela had left him. It had gone lukewarm, but he drank it like it was something sacred. Across the room, one of the truckers scoffed under his breath. "Ain't right," he muttered, shaking his head. "She made a scene. Could just done her job." His companion smirked and added, "Yeah, well, now she ain't got one." Outside, Angela paused for a moment by her car, a second-hand Ford with a cracked windshield and a gas tank that barely kept up with her shifts. Her hands trembled slightly, still curled as if holding that old coffee pot. She stared at her reflection in the car window, searching for something in her own eyes, maybe a sense of relief, maybe pride, but what she found was weight, heavy, familiar. Not regret, but consequence. She slid into the driver's seat, the sun baking through the windshield, and sat in stillness. The radio flickered on with a soft click. A gospel station, barely in range, warbled out a line from an old hymn, "I don't feel no ways tired." Angela exhaled through her nose, a dry, tired laugh catching in her throat. It wasn't just a job, not to her. That place, despite its smallness, had been survival. Rent, groceries, bus fare for her son. She remembered how she'd fought for that job 5 years ago when they didn't want to hire her because she'd been out of work too long. The interview had felt more like a favor than an opportunity. They hadn't cared that she'd worked 2 other diners before, only that she'd had a gap. "Some things in your file made us hesitate," the manager had said. She knew what he meant, and she took the job anyway because she had to. Back inside, the tension broke like glass. The manager grabbed a rag and began wiping down the counter aggressively, like scrubbing away the memory. "We don't need that kind of drama in here," he said, more to himself than to anyone. A woman near the door piped up, "Well, I ain't coming back if folks like that get to hang around. I mean, what kind of place lets a homeless druggie eat for free?" Another added, "Didn't even ask for ID or nothing. Could be dangerous, could have had a weapon." Hell said nothing, just listened. His sandwich was only half eaten, the coffee almost gone. He turned his head slowly, observing each voice, each comment, not with judgment, but with something deeper. Like someone watching a play he'd seen too many times. Angela, meanwhile, had driven home. The parking lot at her apartment complex was half empty, shaded by a crooked pine tree that leaned toward the cracked sidewalk. Her unit on the 2nd floor faced west, and by this hour the sun laid heavy on the blinds. She unlocked the door, dropped her bag, and sank into the old recliner with the busted spring. The house was still. Her son wouldn't be back from class until late. She stared at the ceiling, then at the phone on the counter. No messages, no missed calls, just silence and the low tick of the wall clock. A few hours passed. The light changed. Angela opened the fridge and stared inside like it might offer answers. A bottle of ketchup, half a carton of milk, a Tupperware of rice and beans. It would stretch. It always stretched. But something in her chest wouldn't settle. Not because she regretted what she did, that part was solid, but because for the first time in a long while she'd stepped outside the line, or the line that said be polite, Don't make noise, take the hit, and keep moving. And she hadn't just stepped out. She'd burned the damn thing. Her phone finally buzzed. A message from her sister in Atlanta. Saw something about a Waffle House blow-up? You good? Angela didn't answer. She turned the phone face down and sank deeper into the chair. The next morning, she checked her account out of habit. There was barely $30 yesterday. She expected maybe less after rent was processed. But what she saw made her blink. Her available balance was 5 figures, $50,000, deposited overnight. She sat up straight, thinking it must be a glitch. She refreshed the screen. Same amount. Under the memo line was a single sentence. Tip for compassion. Never stop feeding the hungry. For a moment she just stared at the screen. Her brain couldn't catch up to what her eyes were telling her. She scrolled. No bank errors, no overdraft protection, just a direct deposit. Anonymous but signed. Angela stood, her hand still holding the phone, her breath short. She thought of the man again. The stillness of him. The way he didn't defend himself. The way he looked at her, not with gratitude exactly, but with recognition, like he'd been there too once. Like he'd seen someone make a choice that cost them everything just to prove they still had something left inside. And now, this. She didn't scream. Didn't cry. She just closed her eyes, and for the first time in what felt like years, let herself feel safe. Not because the money solved everything, but because somewhere in the middle of that hot, cruel afternoon, someone had seen her. Someone had understood. The next morning felt different, not brighter, not lighter, just charged. Angela sat at her kitchen table, a chipped mug of coffee in her hand, the kind she'd always made too strong. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the old refrigerator and the occasional creak from the ceiling fan. She hadn't slept much. The number in her bank account still sat untouched, like a loaded question. She checked it 4 times, half expecting it to disappear, but it hadn't. $50,000, real, immediate. She'd traced the deposit as far as the bank support team would allow. Private source verified, no fraud flags, they'd said. And the memo line hadn't changed. Tip for compassion. Never stop feeding the hungry. Not you. Angela stared into her coffee. The bitterness didn't hit like it usually did. Her mind was looping one image over and over, those glassy, strange eyes peeking from under a sweat-stained hood. Hell. She hadn't even known if that was his real name. People like him often carried borrowed names, lost names, names made up to keep what little they had left. But A.E. Those initials. Now they were tied to something larger, something that made no sense at all. Who was he? Elsewhere, in the back corner of a small downtown cafe in Atlanta, a quiet man sat with his coat folded neatly over the back of his chair. He wore a crisp button-down now, navy, with thin white pinstripes, and a pair of polished Oxfords that still bore the faint outline of dust near the heel. His hair, damp from the morning rain, was slicked back carefully. He stirred a cappuccino without drinking it. Across from him sat a journalist, young, hungry, and just sharp enough to know when he was in the middle of a story worth chasing. So, the reporter said, flipping open a notepad, you're saying no one knew who you were when you walked in that Waffle House? Hell no. Harold smiled faintly. That was kind of the point. The journalist leaned in. And why that place? Why Georgia? Why that day? Harold paused for a moment, eyes drifting toward the rain-specked window. It wasn't about the place. It was about the test. A test? The reporter repeated. Harold nodded slowly. I wanted to see something, whether anyone still recognized what decency looked like when it came without a suit and a title. The reporter scribbled notes furiously, then asked, So you're saying you purposely went in there dressed like— He hesitated, searching for the right word. Like someone you wouldn't hire, someone you might cross the street to avoid? Harold finished for him. Yeah, that's exactly what I did. Angela hadn't seen the interview yet. It hadn't aired. But news traveled in strange ways. Her neighbor, Miss Carolyn, who never missed a morning talk show, knocked on her door, breathless. Girl, you won't believe who that man was, the one from the diner. He's some big-shot investment guy, owns half of, what was it, Tria Capital or something? Angela blinked, confused. Carolyn held up her phone, squinting at the article. Hell Engelstein, goes by Hell for short, used to be homeless in his 20s. Now he's loaded. Like, loaded. Angela's heart thudded once, hard. She took the phone and read. There it was, a still image of him seated in the Waffle House, hunched, quiet, wearing that same battered coat. Same eyes, same stillness, but now the caption said something entirely different. CEO's disguise. Billionaire pretends to be homeless to test compassion. The headline made her stomach turn, not because of the money, not even the disguise, but the word pretend. She thought of the way he chewed that sandwich, the hollow way he'd clutched the coffee mug. That wasn't pretend. That was someone who remembered real hunger. She didn't believe for a second that man had walked in as an actor. He'd walked in as someone looking to find out if the world still made room for mercy. The story spread quickly. By noon, her inbox was full. Reporters, morning shows, even a podcast about modern kindness and capitalism wanted her story. Some offered checks, others promises of exposure. She didn't reply to any of them. Instead, she took a walk. Just a few blocks, no destination. She needed air, space, something to clear the pounding in her head. On the corner of a quiet street lined with magnolia trees, she saw him again. No cameras, no crowd, just him standing beside a bike rack, folding his umbrella with care. He saw her almost instantly. Didn't smile, didn't wave, just waited. Angela crossed the street slowly, uncertain. As she approached, she asked quietly, "Why me?" Harold shrugged. "Because you didn't hesitate." "That's not an answer," she said, more sharply than she intended. He nodded. "No, it's not, but it's the truth." She studied him. No coat now, his shirt pressed, shoes clean. Every inch of him the kind of man who owned boardrooms and steered hedge funds. But the eyes were the same, older than their color, quiet. "You could have said something," she murmured. He tilted his head. "Would it have changed what you did?" Angela thought. "No." "Then it doesn't matter," he said. "That's the point." They stood there a moment longer, the street quiet but alive in the way cities always are when no one's paying attention. Finally, he reached into his jacket and handed her a small envelope. No branding, no business card. Just her name, handwritten in blue ink. Inside, a note. "Open your own place. Serve who you want. Make the rules. No one gets turned away." And below it, a phone number. No signature, just 3 words. "If you need." She looked up, ready to ask something, maybe why, maybe how, maybe what's next, but he was already walking away, not disappearing, just leaving space for her to decide what came next. 2 months later, a new sign hung above a small corner lot just off Old National Highway in College Park, Georgia. The building had once been a laundromat, then a pawn shop, and for the last 6 years it had sat empty, its windows covered in faded paper, weeds curling up through cracked concrete. Now the sign read, "McCoy's Diner. If you're hungry, come on in." It wasn't flashy, just black letters on a white background, hand-painted, a little crooked, but it said everything Angela needed it to say. Inside, the booths were second-hand, mismatched, but polished with care. The tables had little cards on them, not with menus, but with messages. "You belong here. No one eats alone. Kindness is currency." The kitchen was clean, functional, and staffed with people who knew how it felt to be overlooked. Single mothers, folks with records, veterans without pensions. Angela hired them not out of charity, but out of truth. They understood the mission. She didn't have to explain what it meant to give someone a second chance when you'd never been given a first. Word traveled quickly. Not viral. Angela never chased headlines, but steady. A Sunday school group came by one weekend and offered to donate eggs every week. A retired carpenter volunteered to fix the back door for free, and once a man in a dark hoodie left $200, 0 cents on the counter without saying a word. Angela found herself working longer hours than she had in years, but she never felt the weight of them. There was something different now in every plate she served, every coffee she poured. It wasn't just food, it was choice. Her choice. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low behind the parking lot, casting long shadows across the diner floor, a familiar voice came through the screen door. "Still making the coffee too strong, I bet." Angela looked up from the register and smiled. Harold stood just inside the doorway, not in a suit this time, just jeans and a button-up, sleeves rolled to his elbows. He looked comfortable in a way she hadn't seen before, at peace, maybe, or maybe just proud. Angela gestured to the counter. "Sit down, you're late for lunch." He chuckled and slid into a stool. She poured him a mug without asking. "Still no cream, right?" He nodded. "You remember." They sat in silence for a while, the kind that only exists between two people who've already said everything important. The kitchen clanged quietly in the background. Outside, a family laughed as they got into a car, full and happy. Harold finally spoke. "You know, when I walked into that Waffle House, I didn't know what I was hoping to find. Maybe I thought I'd feel disgusted, confirm something dark about people. Or maybe I thought I'd feel clever. Like I'd proven a point." Angela raised an eyebrow. "And what did you find instead?" He looked at her, and for the first time his voice softened. "I found proof that the world's still breathing. Through people like you." Angela didn't know how to respond to that. Compliments had never sat easy with her. She preferred action, but something about the way he said it, earnest, unscripted, made her believe it wasn't flattery. It was gratitude. He pulled out a folded piece of paper and slid it across the counter. "It's a quiet investment," he said. "No boardroom, no return projections, just support. If you ever want to grow, add a second location, maybe a food truck, I'll be there." Angela stared at the paper but didn't touch it. She wasn't thinking about expansion, not yet. Right now, what mattered was keeping the coffee hot, the lights on, and the door open to anyone who needed a seat. That night, after everyone had gone home, she sat alone by the window watching the traffic lights blink red, then green, then yellow in their endless cycle. Her son had started helping out on weekends. He'd told her he was proud. That was the kind of wealth she never expected to have. She thought of all the small moments that had brought her here. A sandwich, a voice raised in protest, a door closing behind her, a silent man who wasn't what he seemed. She thought, too, about the cost. Kindness isn't free. It costs comfort, it costs approval, sometimes it costs a job, but it gives back something harder to measure: dignity, purpose, and a glimpse of the world not as it is, but as it could be. And maybe that's the real tip, the one she never asked for but earned. The wind outside picked up, rustling the old pine across the street. Angela sipped from her mug, still bitter, still strong, and smiled into the quiet. In this place, no one asked where you came from, only if you were hungry. Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.